if being a follower of Jesus isn't all about staying clean and spotless? What if it also involves getting our hands dirty? What if it's time to stop watching from the sidelines and time to get stuck in?
Cool. Good morning. Welcome. Hey, it's great to be together. I don't know if you've ever been somewhere that was slightly kind of maybe uncomfortable or a place that you'd normally try to avoid. And, I'd like to tell you about a time when I, as a very responsible parent, took my children to a beach. So we were in Southern California. We decided to go to a place called Venice Beach. You've probably heard of it. You might have heard of Venice Beach. And so we decided to go there. And the only thing was we went there like after dark. And that's, we discovered that that's probably not the thing that you are supposed to do. Venice Beach is quite nice. You've got lots of shops, lots of boardwalks and everything. It's only a couple of miles stretch. Now, I'd like to just show you something that's on TripAdvisor about this beach. It says this. It says, it's relatively safe during the day, but do not go after dark. Venice Beach has now been classed as the single most dangerous beach in the entire US of A as of December 2021. Right. And me being the responsible parent and adult, I decided to take my kids there. Yeah. Caden at 4 years old could tell you what the variety of different types of marijuana were. He could smell it. He'd be like, yeah, I know what that is. Yes, because we exposed our children at a very young age to a very crazy area. And what happens is in the evenings, there's a lot of homeless people. There's a couple of thousand homeless people. It's actually in California, it's now the second biggest to a place called Skid Row. You might have heard of Skid Row. It's like a homeless village, encampment, whatever you want to call it. But this is now second in size to Skid Row. And the reason people are telling you not to go there at nighttime, because as soon as the tourists go away and all the lights shut off on the boardwalk, everybody starts setting up their tents and coming out of the woodwork. And thousands of people start setting up outside. It's got a high crime rate, a high drug use rate, lots of people transient, and they just tell you to avoid it. And So if you ever want to know where to go for a trip, obviously ask me because I'm full of great advice, and you can always trust me to take your children somewhere safe. So, yeah, it did feel very awkward when we were there. And that's not the only story I have in my repertoire about exposing my children to things that they should not have been exposed to at a young age. You can ask them about all the different concerts and things that we actually took them to and probably shouldn't have. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Sometimes the places we avoid, it's because of the people. See, there's nothing wrong itself with the beach. There's nothing wrong with the sand and the trees and what's there. It's actually not the place. It's usually the people. The places we avoid are actually the people we avoid, but we just say it's the place. And we tidy it up and we polish it and we say it's the place. And sometimes the crazy thing is this stuff even happened in the Bible. Like Jesus took his own followers, his own disciples, his own friends, his own gang, if you like, his own people. He took them into places that he never expected to be. He took them into totally awkward places because following Jesus is sometimes messy. It's not all tidy. And last week, Sam kicked off our new theme, which is called Get Stuck In. And we used a really powerful illustration. I don't know if you've seen it. If you missed it, go ahead and you can catch it online. If you go into the YouTube channel, it's there. And he did this thing where he had us look at our hands, and he had us think about what our hands are going to touch and encounter this week. And a really powerful, practical application of getting stuck in with stuff. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think if we're really going to be honest, because we should be an honest church, we prefer the handsome Jesus. Yeah? You know the one like in the films, the one with like a nice, perfect tan and curly, wavy hair and well-kept beard, and he's not too tall, but he's not too short, and he's a bit muscly, but he's not like, he's not like a barbarian, but then he's not like a puny little thing. Don't we like that kind of Jesus? And we sort of prefer the Jesus who's gentle, he's placating, he's kind, he's nice with what he says, and he's a good little teacher, and we really like a tame Jesus. We prefer the Jesus that's more bark and not bite. We prefer the Jesus who's pleasant and not a meddler. We prefer the Jesus who makes us comfortable, not uncomfortable. We prefer the Jesus who's really more focused on making us happy rather than seeing us changed and grow. If we're really honest, right? And maybe that's just me. We prefer the Jesus that is tame and gentle and handsome and kind and whatnot. But what if actually Jesus was more disturbing than we like to admit? What if he was more provocative? What if he was more taboo? What if he upended things more than we actually care to sometimes realize? And Jesus led his followers into uncomfortable places, and he didn't do that because he liked them to be comfortable. He took them into uncomfortable places because in uncomfortable places are uncomfortable people that you usually avoid. And you avoid the place because you want to avoid the people that are there. We know that's true, don't we? You know that at different parts of town, different areas and cities, you sort of avoid it. But it's really the people that we avoid. And this goes on all around the world. This isn't like a new idea, and it's happened for centuries. So we're going to have a quick little history lesson, little snapshot of things about the Jewish history, if you like. So originally there were 12 tribes, and they're all sort of sons of, so Joseph, they had all these 12 children. They grew up and they became 12 tribes. And then by the time of King David, so when King David was around, King David took these 12 tribes of people, and they were the 12 tribes that became the one kingdom, if you like. And David was the king. Up to that point, they didn't really have kings. Saul was the first king, and then this dude named David was the next king. And all these 12 tribes became one nation. So just imagine for a moment, so if you're watching online, you are the first tribe. You guys are like the Apple Macs. You're the Macintoshes. No, you're the clan Macintosh. No. So if you're watching online, we've got a tribe online, and then we've got 11 more tribes in this room. So we've got like a few over here. We've got some at the back, some at the back. So we've got 11 tribes in the room. We've got one online. And you 12 tribes are the kingdom of Israel. You're the nation, and David is your king. And David built, he built the big temple, remember? And then Solomon, his son, came along and he finished off this work, and David made the capital Jerusalem. This is still a hotly contested place. Jerusalem is the capital. David was the one who made it the capital. And then his son came along, Solomon. It's a little history lesson. His son came along, and he tried to hold the 12 of us together, and he kind of did an okay job, but not very good. And by the time his son came along, so David's grandson came along, the kingdom split. It divided. And 2 tribes stayed in the north, and 10 stayed in the south. And here's your map. You've got these 2 tribes. And in the north, they were called the kingdom of Israel. And the 10 tribes in the south were the Judeans, if you like. So, for this side of the room, this lot over here are the 2 tribes that have stayed with the north. Just for illustration purposes, because we know we really do like you, but anyway, just for today, you're the 2 tribes that have broken off, okay? Now, the northern tribes, remember, they didn't have a temple, and they didn't have a capital, because that all ended up staying in the south. You see Jerusalem in the purple. Jerusalem was still in the south. So all of us over here in the south, we had all the good stuff. We had the temple, we had the palace, we had the main capital, et cetera, et cetera. You guys didn't have anything. And if you don't have a temple, what do? You build one, okay? So you get a builder, he comes along, and he sorts it out for you. So they had to build some temples. They decided okay, this mountain that we've got in our area, this mountain is holy. And then we had a mountain in our area because we already had the real temple. They made a counterfeit temple. You see, we used to be one, but over time what happens, you start making these differences between you. And so these people had to build a different temple, and then with their different temple, they then worshiped in a different place. And actually over time, because this is what happens with people groups. They find more and more reasons about why the other person is wrong and why the other person is not doing it correctly, because we're the purists. We're the ones doing it right. We're in the south. We're the 10 that are doing it right, and these 2 over here are doing it wrong. And in fact, these 2 over here, these 2 tribes in the north, what they decided as well is they decided to only keep the first 5 books that Moses wrote. And that's actually now the first 5 books in the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Neuters. Well, now that means something totally different. If you don't know what it means, you can ask your mom and dad later, and then when they say to you, where in the world did you learn that word? You can say church, and they'll say you're never going back there again. Anyway, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Oh, come on. Thank you. Those first 5 books are the only books that the 2 tribes decided were sacred. The rest of it is rubbish. So they said, they were like history books and books of poetry and books of prophecy and different things like that. That we had decided this, these collection of writings were sacred to us, but they decided that it wasn't anymore. And the 2 tribes also decided that theirs was the most accurate because they actually had the original. That's what they said. But of course, you know what it's like. If someone else says they've got the original, we're like, no, we've got the original. You're just doing it differently. You're corrupting it now. You're actually corrupting the worship. You're corrupting where you go for worship. You're corrupting everything. This is what it was. We still have the real deal stuff. And then you know what else these lot did? They intermarried. Yeah, exactly. They found new partners, husbands, wives, etc., for their children from other tribes of other types of people. We had spent so long maintaining a pure bloodline, and these mongrels go and mess it up. Yeah, this is what was going on. This is what was happening. And we even called them things like dogs. Yeah, that was a word that was used to refer to this type of people. They were dogs because they were impure. They were half-breeds. They were this like mix of things. And what happened is they mixed everything. They mixed the religion, they mixed their ethics, and they just muddied the waters so much. And they even, at times, sided with people who fought against us. There were times when people were attacking the South, and this lot helped them out. You see, in time, you could understand that you didn't feel very nicely about one another. We hated each other. And this is what happened. By the time of Jesus is around, his followers are here, and this tension has gone on for almost 1,000 years. Okay, this isn't like, oh yeah, well my dad said that, your dad said this. Man, this is like way beyond like just what your parents did. This is like generations of generations of generations of history. It's ingrained so much in your culture, you don't know anything different. Right? None of you were alive to remember it any differently. It's part of who you are. It's the way you've done everything, it's the way you do everything, and it's the way everything will always be. It's just the way it is. And into this setting and this culture, this was the mix of where Jesus and his disciples showed up. And listen to this. This is something from the Mishnah, which is a Jewish collection of oral writings. And what they did was like oral rules that were written down, if you like, and how they applied different things. And it says this in this thing called the Mishnah. And it says this: if you eat the bread of a Samaritan, which is what we labeled this whole other group of people as, if you eat the bread of a Samaritan, it's like eating the flesh of a pig. You see, one of the things that is most insulting to us is to eat pork. And now we're saying to eat the bread from a Samaritan is equivalent to like gnawing on a good old pork steak or something. How more disgusting could you be? That's how unclean these people were. This is an oral rule from that time. They were despised and looked down on. And this has been going on for ages. And this brings us right up to where our story takes place. It's written in the book of John. And you might have heard this story before. Maybe you don't even have to be a follower of Jesus. You might have actually heard this story before that we're going to look at. It's a really well-known story. And in John chapter 4, Jesus is with his followers, and it says this. He says, they've been going through the Judean countryside, which was in the south. And then in the Galilee on that map was further up, so they were going to go further up, and they had to pass through Samaria. And this is what's so cool about the Bible, because it's just really honest. He's like, man, Jesus was like plain tuckered out. He was like, dude, man, I've been wearing these sandals for 17 miles. My feet are killing me. I'm just going to have a sit down. And so it says he sat down because he was tired and he needed a rest. And it was the middle of the day. The story just carries on, and it says this. Then a woman, a Samaritan, came to get water from the well. And Jesus asks her, he says, hey, man, I'm so thirsty. Would you please get me something to drink? And then this whole passage is really interesting because there's loads of little asides. And it says the disciples weren't here because they'd gone into town to get some food. And so it carries on. The story just carries on. So this woman is like, whoa, hang on. Who are you? You know, how come you, a Jew, are asking me, a Samaritan, for a drink? Like, what's going on? Why in the world are you doing this? And then it has another little aside, essentially saying, these two groups do not hang out. They do not do things together. And then Jesus does one of those things that sometimes he gave these answers, which are actually just flippin' confusing. So she says, how come we're doing this? And then he says to her, he says this. He says, if you knew the gift of God and who I am, you would be asking me for a drink, and I would give you fresh, living water. She's thinking, I didn't want to ask you, right? Okay, these are human people. These are real people in real situations, okay? Let's think about what's going on here, you know? She's like, well, how come you're asking me for a drink? And then he's like, well, lady, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. She's like, yeah, but still, why are you asking me for a drink? That's why I'm asking you. Right? This is what's going on, yeah? Anyway, so she's a little bit confused, understandably, okay? So she's taken aback first that he's asking her, and then she's totally confused by this answer. He shouldn't be talking to her and all these kind of things. And then so she just, decides to be kind and courteous and keep talking to this weird Jew who's bumped his head or something, yeah? So then she carries on, and she says this in the next verse. So she goes, you don't even have a bucket with you. Okay? Isn't it cool? She's just like so practical. She's like, wait a minute, why are you asking me for a drink? He's like, if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. And she's like, listen, buddy, you don't even have a bucket, so how are you going to get a drink? Right? You don't have a bucket, and the well is deep. How in the world do you think you are going to get me a drink? She's like, she's just so practical, isn't she? She's cool. So she's so practical. And then Jesus says this. He says, everyone who drinks from this water will get thirsty again, but anyone who drinks from the water that I give will never thirst again. She's like, you're not very good at answering questions, are you, mister? It's like, this is not what I asked again. Yeah? So it's like, what's going on here? But then she says this crazy thing. She's like, you know what? If you've got living water, count me in. So she says, yeah, fine. If you got living water, I'm there. So that's this awesome water. And then so Jesus says to her, he says, okay, cool. Yeah. Now go to town, go back and get your husband and come back. And she says, well, actually, I don't have a husband. And then Jesus replies and says, yeah, you said it. You're correct. You don't have a husband. And the man you're living with now isn't even your husband. You've had 5 husbands before, and this man that you're living with now isn't even your husband. Can you just imagine this conversation? She's like, here we are talking about water. It's a hot day. I understand it's really hot, and now you're like talking about my sex life. Okay, it's just like jumped, hasn't it? I mean, think about it. This conversation has just gone like way crazy. You're talking about like my marital situations, and she's freaking out because she's like, oh my gosh, how does he know? In John 4:19, it says, she can tell that this man is a prophet. She realizes, she's switched on. She's switched on and she realizes there's something more going on. And the penny begins to drop for her. And then this crazy exchange happens. They go into this conversation. And she says this, well, wait a minute, we worship at this mountain, and you guys say that you worship in this mountain. Remember, they're talking about the stuff that they've known for centuries, for history. This is the situation. So she says, yeah, but we do things this way, you do things that way. And Jesus is like, hey, listen up, lady. There's going to be a time when it's got nothing to do with what mountain you go to, because those who worship are going to worship in spirit and truth, which just means where you're at, I can be there. The presence of God will be there. The presence of God is not going to be confined to a mountain, to a temple. She's like, our ancestors did things this way, and your ancestors did things this way. And he's like, there's going to come a time when actually it's got nothing to do with where you go and the history and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, oh, so they're having this like deep conversation all of a sudden. And then she makes this incredibly huge statement. She says this, I know that everything will become clear when Christ comes, when the Christ comes. That word there means like the Messiah, like the promised one. They were waiting for this person to come. It's like finally when this person arrives. So she says, I know it's going to actually all make sense because this conversation has been really confusing. It will all make sense when the Christ comes. And then Jesus says something for the first time and the most explicitly clear time. This is the first time and nearly the only time he says this. In all of the recordings of the life of Jesus, he says to this unnamed woman, it's me. I am the promised one. They were talking about water, and all of a sudden, he's revealing to her that he is the promised one. The disciples hung out with him for a few years at this point. It's about 2.5 years into Jesus' life on earth. And they still hadn't quite twigged it. And he has a conversation with this lady, and he tells her flat out, I'm the Messiah. I'm the promised one. And she's like, woohoo. And it's the first record of Jesus revealing himself as the Messiah. And at this point, the disciples come back from McDonald's or wherever it was they went to grab some grub, get a camel burger or whatever. So they're coming back up, and then, anyway, yeah. So they're coming back up to where Jesus is, and then this is what they say: the disciples returned, and they were surprised to find him talking to her. I guess because she's from one of the tribes of the north. They're the unclean swine, these dogs, yeah. So what in the world is he doing talking to her? But I love this. This is how the Bible is just so honest, but nobody had it doesn't say this. No one had the guts to ask. Nobody wanted to ask, what do you want? Or why is he even talking to her? You could just imagine the disciples are coming back with their takeaway bags, and they're like, dude, what and then they're eyeballing each other, saying you ask him. Yeah, I am not going there. There's no way. Just pretend you don't see her. So they probably just sat down and got their food out and started eating and just ignored the fact that he's sitting there chatting to this lady, right? They just didn't even address the elephant in the room. They didn't know what to do. It was so awkward and so uncomfortable for them because they were in a place that they never should have been. They could have avoided it, yet here they are, and now they're speaking to people, which is why they want to avoid this type of place in the first place. And Jesus so often did the unexpected, and he didn't do it for shock value. He didn't do it to just be throw over a table, 2 fingers to the system. He wasn't just this anarchist. He wasn't just this make a scene to make a scene. Everything he did was for a reason and for a purpose. And so what was going on there was he wanted them to grow. He didn't want them to be comfortable. So Jesus did something. He did something crazy and outrageous because he was breaking something that was wrong by doing something that was right. It wasn't just this anarchist rebel. There's a purpose for what he's doing things. And those people who were his followers and his closest friends needed to know that if you're going to follow me, there's a totally different way of doing things. And it wasn't just to upset the system. It wasn't just some sort of punk who just wants to make noise for the sake of making noise. Jesus was going to break something that was wrong by doing something that was right. So anyway, she goes legging it back into town. She goes running down to tell everybody what was going on. So she goes into town. She tells a bunch of people about everything that's going on. And it says this. She says this. Why she goes back. This is funny. This is cool. This is crazy. So she goes back into town to tell everyone that, I didn't put this verse up here. So she goes into town to tell everybody about Jesus. And his disciples were like, hey, are you still hungry? And Jesus is like, no, I've had some food already. And they're like, did he ring Uber? I mean, is he just rung Just Eat or something? Is Deliveroo now working in Samaria? I don't know. They're just like, how in the world did Jesus get food? And Jesus says, my food, the thing that satisfies me, is to do the will of the Father. They had this little exchange with the disciples. Because see, they were pretty confused about everything as well. So she's running into town, and it says, it's got this verse here, John 4:39-42. And it says this. It says, many believed because of the woman's testimony. She runs into town. It says that she said, come and see the man. Come and see. Many believed because of the woman's testimony. And then they urged Jesus to stay with them. He only stopped because he was tired. He stopped in the middle of the day at a well. They were tired and hungry. And he stayed for 2 more days. And then because of what he taught, many more became believers. It's a really cool story. It's a crazy story. And as I say, you might have heard it before. And it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's just awesome. It's a really cool story. And it's just really cool. This is a total aside. It's not even in the notes, so don't just be confused if you're reading the notes. John does this thing. John wrote these books. And in John chapter 3, the chapter just before, Jesus has this one-on-one conversation with this guy named Nicodemus. And this guy named Nicodemus was like a high priest. So he was at the top of the class. He was a fella from the certain tribes, and he did all this stuff right. And he was one of the priests, and he's asking questions to Jesus. They're having this private conversation, just Jesus and Nicodemus. The next story that John tells us is the totally opposite. It's Jesus on his own, another one-to-one conversation. The stuff with Nicodemus happened in the middle of the night. It was really dark, and it's saying that Jesus is with this woman in the middle of the hot day. So you have to read the 2 stories in parallel. John connects what's going on. And you've got the religious elite from the south asking these questions, and then you've got this woman from the dog end of this half-breed north having another one-to-one conversation with Jesus. It's really cool, these stories. Just encouraging you to get into the stories. But there's loads going on here that we could miss. Just culturally, we could miss it because we just read it like a little story and we miss what's going on. And it starts out by saying that Jesus sat down in the middle of the day. And you might have heard this before, but when it was the middle of the day, it's not when you went to get the water. Okay, they did not have taps in their house. So at the hottest point of the day was not when you put a big bucket on your head and walk to the well to pump it and then carry it back. If you have any sense, you would go in the morning or in the evening when it's cooler. And the only reason people went in the middle of the day is because you avoided the people at the morning or the evening, or those people avoided you. And you were the kind of person that you didn't really associate with. And so the very fact that this woman, it tells us the detail that she's there in the middle of the day, implies that she's already been ostracized in some way from her own people. So not only is she separated tribe-wise, she's actually separated with her own people, her own sort of town, if you like. And not only was she a Samaritan who the Jews avoided and we didn't like, but for whatever reason, she was also just pushed away. It then goes on to tell us that she's been divorced 5 times. I mean, why did John include these details? There has to be a reason. He's setting the scene. He's explaining things. And at the time, which is still how it works in some places around the world, women were viewed as property. They were owned by the men, right? And the man could say, if the woman displeased him, he could give her a certificate of divorce, and that's it. No, the man could just divorce a woman for a variety of reasons, and could be because she was barren, she couldn't have children. So essentially, she's no good. So basically, livestock, move on. They had no rights in and of themselves. And when it says that she was divorced 5 times, it's not just, we might think, she's unlucky in love. It's not really about that. She can't divorce the man. The man can only divorce her. So for whatever reason, 5 times she's been given a piece of paper that says, I no longer want you in my life. 5 times. It doesn't tell us what the reason is. We don't know why. But how do you go from where would you have been in that society to have been pushed over, passed away, disregarded 5 times? It's not just like it didn't work out between us. Nowadays we can sort of just separate with people because we just sort of, my gosh, have you seen his toes? She never does the dishes. We separate for little silly things. But for whatever reason, we don't know what's going on. She's been disregarded 5 times. 5 times. How do you carry that? Maybe that's why she had to go to the well in the middle of the day. It tells us she was divorced 5 times. She's essentially an object to be owned. It sounds archaic, I'm sorry, but that's how it was. And in this story, there's no condemnation, and there's no explanation either. There's no condemnation for the situation that she finds herself in. She's not in trouble for anything. There's no, in the whole exchange, plenty of times Jesus actually told people off. She's not told off at all. There's no condemnation. There's nothing communicated in any way to say. There's no justification of anything. It just is taken as a fact. And it doesn't tell us, but anyway, we know. But not only that, Jesus broke with some more rules. This is so much more uncomfortable than we realize in our Western society. So Jesus is on his own. He's a single person, and he's chatting to a single female, a single woman. A Samaritan woman in public, and he's asking to her from a drink. It says this, according to the Pharisees, the rules that to touch a Samaritan or someone living with a person they're not married to, or to touch a woman who is not your wife or child will make you unclean. That's the cultural rule of the day. For him to even be associating with her was actually going to make him unclean. And then for him to ask her for a drink, which she would have to pull up and then serve to him, would make him unclean, according to everybody's rules on this side of the room. We'd all decided this is how we live, this is how things are done. We know how to keep everything pure and clean because other people defile it, so thousands of years we've been keeping everything clean and pure and right. And so we have rules so people understand not to break the rules. And Jesus is breaking so many rules. He should not be speaking to a woman. He should not be speaking to a woman he's not married to or is his child. He's not doing that. He should not be asking them for a drink. Now, not only that, it's a Samaritan. So he shouldn't be doing that either. On every account, he is doing what you shouldn't be doing. And it says this. They have this full conversation about spiritual matters. They're having a discussion about theology, faith. And do you know you couldn't do that with a woman either? You're not allowed to. If you were married, if you were a woman and you were married and you had a question about some sort of faith thing or church thing or whatever it was, the temple stuff, if you had a question, you had to ask your husband. And your husband had to tell you. And you had to ask him at home. You didn't do it in public. How shameful. You only do it at home. You don't have conversations of spiritual matters in public. And yet Jesus is having a full-blown conversation about spiritual matters with someone he shouldn't be talking to, about things he shouldn't be talking about, in front of all these people. He's breaking. It's hard for us to understand how many rules he's actually breaking. It's just crazy. And a rabbi, that's what they called the teachers of the day, a rabbi would not have women followers. But it's very clear from the Gospels that Jesus did. It tells us time and time again, and the women who were with Jesus and the women who followed Jesus. Jesus had women followers, which was really radical and pretty shocking, culturally, crazily shocking. And then Jesus did that thing which we talked about a second ago. He told her so clearly, I'm the Messiah. Okay, they're not just talking about, hey, we worship at this temple and we worship at that temple. Oh, that's cool. And what do you guys do at your temple? And here's what we do at our temple. No, it's not just general conversation stuff. He's like, the Messiah is coming. And she says, I know, and when the Messiah is here, everything's going to make sense. And then he says to her, lady, you're looking at him. This is a conversation you should never be having, and he's having it. This is why this story is just so crazy. It's just so radical. It's just crazy. And then she believes it. She believes it. And she, then, this unnamed woman, is actually the first evangelist, the first witness of Jesus in the Bible. This is the first time he tells anybody who he is, and then this is the first time that anybody goes somewhere else to tell people about who he is. This unnamed, disregarded, mongrel, half-breed dog of a woman is now Jesus' chosen mouthpiece to tell an entire town. This is a shocking, shocking story. This woman who's been divorced 5 times because she's been written off and written off and written off and written off and written off is now the chosen voice piece for an entire town. It is such a shocking story, and the disciples would never have been there if they always lived their lives avoiding uncomfortable places, because we avoid uncomfortable places not because of the place, but because of the people. And if they avoided an uncomfortable place, they never would have met this type of woman. And if they never met that woman, an entire town would never have known Jesus. It says that she ran to the town, and then she says, come and see. Come and see. She is inviting people to come and see. And that's the same story for us. People are inviting us to come and see. Maybe you've been invited this morning. Maybe you're watching online. Someone sends you a link to this message. You're coming and see. We invite people to come and see. They come and see to discover and learn and experience what's going on. She's sharing the good news of Jesus, and it's crazy. It's totally, totally crazy. And here's what she does. She doesn't say, come and see the temple, come and see the priest, come and see a doctrine, come and see an idea, come and learn about this philosophy. She says, come and see the person, the one. You see, she got it. She understood it had nothing to do with centuries of tradition and centuries of religion that they built up and done certain things in certain ways. And then she runs down there and she says, it's got nothing to do with any of this stuff. It doesn't matter from the 2 tribes or the 10 tribes or the temple here or the temple there. The traditions here, the religion here, the ritual here, it's got nothing to do with that. Come and meet the person. Come and see the person. It's all about the person. It's crazy. And it says in John 4:42, the townspeople said to her, we no longer believe just because of what you've said. Now we've heard for ourselves, and we know he's the Savior of the world. It's a little journey there, isn't it? Like, come and see. Maybe you've been invited. Maybe you've come with a friend. You've come here this morning. You're watching online. Come and see. And you come and see because you're just discovering, you're just experiencing. And because of somebody else's testimony, what someone else is telling you, you begin to learn because of what they're saying. And there will come a time when you don't just learn because of what they've told you or what you've seen. You're going to believe because of what you experience. But this is a journey. It's got this whole journey of faith going on here. This is so cool. Come and see. And then they believe what she says, but they don't believe just because of what she says. They learn to believe for themselves. At some point, whether you're exploring faith, you will learn to believe for yourself. There'll be a point where you make a decision for yourself, and they know that he is the Savior of the world. You know what was so cool? She was just going about her everyday, ordinary business. Man, she probably woke up and thought, today is going to be the same as any other day. But this is like such a mundane story of mundane things. A woman getting to the well at the middle of the day, Jesus being tired and sitting down in the middle. I mean, it's not even like, it's no big show or anything, right? This is just like everyday, ordinary stuff. She's going through her everyday, ordinary moments, but this was going to be a day like no other. And her life was totally changed. And the townspeople's lives were totally changed. All because one man was willing to have a conversation that every single rule in the book said, do not speak to her. That's the only reason this story happens. Because one man was willing to have a conversation with someone that nobody was supposed to speak to. Especially not anybody from this side of the room. We don't know where conversations will lead us. We don't know what doors will open. And doors won't open for us if we're so frightened of going to uncomfortable places because of the uncomfortable people that we meet in uncomfortable places. But because Jesus pushed his followers and showed them how to go into uncomfortable places and meet uncomfortable people, lives were totally changed. And there's two things to just wrap it up with. The first thing to say is whether you're online or whether you're here in the room and you're exploring what it means to follow Jesus, I hope this story just burns into your memory that no matter what society has said about you, no matter what circumstances you might have found yourself in, whether you're of your own doing or just because it happened to you, whatever situation you find yourself in, I hope you know that this story shows you that Jesus is like nothing else you've ever experienced. How can you say that you wouldn't be worth discovering or speaking to Jesus if he was willing to do this for her? This story reminds all of us that there's nothing we can say to push us away from Jesus. And if you're here this morning, you're exploring faith, or you're just considering about what it means to follow Jesus, I'd encourage you, don't just take my word for it. Come and see what he's like. Begin to discover more about what he is like, the person of Jesus. This is a powerful story to let you know what Jesus is like. And it's not about tradition and ritual and doing certain things in certain ways. It's about the person. It's about Jesus. Come and meet Jesus. You could be a CEO, you could be an employer, you could be an employee, you could be work in a shop, you could work in, it doesn't matter. This story tells us that no matter what our experiences are, whatever your everyday, ordinary experiences are, you can meet with Jesus. No matter what age you are, you still might be in school, you might be in college, you might be way past that, you might be looking forward to your retirement, you might be thinking, why in the world did I ever retire? No. Whatever stage of life you're at, your story reminds us that Jesus meets us. Jesus still meets people, and I'd love to introduce you to him. I would love to introduce you to him. Come and see this Jesus that I'm talking about. I would love to introduce you to him. And if it helps if you take what I say as your words to believe in, and in time you will learn to believe for yourself. I'd love to introduce you to him. And if you have any questions, you want to chat a bit about more, please just come and speak to us afterwards. If you're online, please just put a comment in the chat and we will get in touch with you as well. And the second thing to say as we close is if you're already a follower of Jesus, I have to warn you now that following Jesus will mean sometimes you get messy. Sometimes you go into uncomfortable places. Because Jesus came to seek and save the lost, and he has not stopped looking. And if we're followers of Jesus, that's what we do as well. And I just wonder how many people have missed out on a life change because somebody was too frightened to have a conversation with them. How many people have been at the bottom of their lives and they might feel written off and disregarded for whatever reason? How many people are in that place and have not yet known that there's anything different because too many followers of Jesus want to keep our hands clean? We're too frightened about saying anything or doing anything. How many people? How many families haven't yet been changed because of fear? She went back to her town. She went back to those people, and a lot more people followed, and a lot more people believed because of her. And if that conversation ever took place with her, those people would never have known what was going on. If her life hadn't been changed, and if she didn't have an encounter with Jesus, she never would have been able to tell others about it as well. How many people, just think for a moment, how many people in this world have not yet heard because followers of Jesus are too frightened and we want to keep everything so clean and tidy and ordered and rule-based, and we just want everything to work out the way we want it to work out. And we've been so frightened to get our hands dirty. Get your hands dirty. Church, we have got to be people who are willing to be made uncomfortable because we don't follow Jesus for our own comfort. Jesus does not want to make us comfortable. He wants to see us grow and change and be more like him. These disciples were so uncomfortable in this situation, they couldn't even ask the question. But in their uncomfortability, they witnessed an entire transformation. What do you think their conversation was like 2 days later when they left this town? What stories do you think we could tell one another a couple days after the event? Just think about it. You imagine Peter and John were just walking there like, I never thought this would happen. Could you imagine that? I mean, they're like, oh, we had this amazing experience, and this family came, and this guy came, and then this lady came, and Jesus was teaching them and speaking to them. We don't even know what happened for 2 days. We don't know what happened, but people's lives were totally changed. Can you imagine the conversation? They arrived at that city tired and hungry and worn out, and they left that city full of life because Jesus said there's another kind of food that will feed you. I think they understood at the end of 2 days what Jesus was talking about, don't you? They probably discovered this is what he means when he says, the stuff that gives me life is doing the will of my Father. If I just can imagine if I was one of those guys that was there with Jesus walking out of that city to the next place, wouldn't you have just felt like sitting on top of the world? I mean, you just, right? Think about it. Like, I would love to hear some good stories. How many good stories are not being told because the church is so frightened of getting their hands dirty? We did a series all about following Jesus, and these next couple of weeks we've been looking at what it means to get stuck in. And the challenge for us as we close, and I'm wrapping it up with this, is if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus is not concerned about you being comfortable. He's concerned about you growing and being more like him. If you want a comfortable faith, you need to find somewhere that just makes you feel tidy and controlled and perfect and whatever. But we're going to be a messy, motley crew because Jesus is still seeking to save the lost, and that's what we're about. Can we pray? Jesus, thank you so much for just these stories that were written down that just remind us, but they just give us such a glimpse into what you're like. Look, God, we just pray for anyone here this morning or who's watching online, God, if they're just wondering what it means to follow Jesus and they're still discovering what you're like, you got to just pray that this story that we've looked at today really, really sinks into their memory about what you're like. God, that you are the God that breaks the rules to fix something. that was wrong. Thank you, Jesus. And then, Father, for those of us who call ourselves followers of you, I just ask that you would give us some courage and some gumption and help us to not be living in fear, but to get our hands messy, to get stuck in. Because there are people whose lives are waiting to be changed if only we would start speaking to them. God, thank you that you empower us, you strengthen us, and you don't leave us on our own. You go with us, and we can do it together and support one another, God. Thank you so much that you are still seeking and saving the lost. God, in your wonderful name we pray. Amen. Have an awesome, awesome week. If you've got any questions about what it means to follow Jesus, I would love to speak to you. Please, we can meet over here, just have a little chat at the end. Would absolutely love to chat to you. If you've got some kiddos collecting from the children's work, grab yourself another coffee and have an awesome week and hang out. And see you again.
What if it's time to stop watching from the sidelines and time to get stuck